You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestall. Throughout history, humans have viewed crows and ravens as birds of mystery, magic, and connected to the supernatural. Taking us on a journey through their history is author Rick Deyampert, which he's covered in his marvellous new book, Crows and Ravens, Mystery, Magic and Myth. But before I speak to Rick, and some of his friends who join us later in the interview, don't forget you can support Mysteries and Monsters by signing up at patreon.com/mysteriesandmonsters. $4 a month gets you ad-free episodes, guaranteed early releases, bonus content, and more. You can click the link in the show notes as usual, and thank you to each and every one of you that continue to support me and the show with your contributions. Thank you. Mysteries and Monsters is across all social media platforms. Please subscribe to the Mysteries and Monsters channel on YouTube. You can also visit mysteriesandmonsters.com for news, episodes, and updates. You can also visit our exclusive merchandise store through TeePublic. In the show notes as always. Our intro and outro music are performed by the marvellous Weary Pines. Thank you as always to Dean Bestall for his marvellous artwork. The show is produced by Brennan Storr of the Ghost Story Guys, and Mysteries and Monsters is delighted to be a part of the Straight Up Strange network. Our Corvid friends can be found all around the world, perhaps simply waiting for us all to discover their magic. Throughout time, cultures from all around the world have viewed crows and ravens as sacred or even supernatural creatures. Tales from numerous peoples reveal how these mystical connections to Corvids were conceived, and in his latest book, Crows and Ravens, Mystery, Magic and Myth, Rick Deyampert explores these fascinating histories. Rick, welcome to Mysteries and Monsters, sir.
Thank you so much. Any day I get to talk about crows is a good day. So thank you for having me, Paul.
Thank you for welcoming me into your lovely home and your wonderful work that you've been building. I'm always interested, Rick, with when people build some kind of symbiotic relationship with what most people would consider a wild, untamable creature of any description, be it a bird or an ape or a lizard even. What was it that drew you to create this kind of relationship with crows? Was it something that you'd grown up with? Were you one of those? Because where I grew up, we used to have people who had pet magpies and crows that would sit on their shoulder and occasionally follow them to school. Were you one of those children?
I am not. I am so jealous of those folks. And one of the joys since my book came out in March on Llewellyn is at book signings or just talks, or I've given workshops on crows and ravens. People share their crow encounters with me, and I'm just like, whoa. So I've heard those tales, and it started for me. My heritage is Irish and French, and in 1995 I went to Ireland for the first time, and in the General Post Office there in Dublin is a statue of Cuchulainn, the epic warrior hero from ancient Irish mythology. And it's a bronze statue. He's tied himself to a post. He's been wounded in battle. He's dying. And on his shoulder is, they don't know if it's a crow or raven. And I thought, I knew just the basic details, but I thought, what's going on with that crow or raven? And turns out most scholars say it's the Morrigan, the ancient Irish battle goddess. And at that time, I was just emerging on my pagan path. And paganism is basically, we see divinity manifested in nature, and we feel that there's a divine masculine and a divine feminine. So that's paganism in a one-sentence structure. So got back to Florida, and I just started noticing the crows and ravens more and more that came into my backyard here at Palm Coast, Florida. And then I started feeding them. I started taking photos and using digital programs to shapeshift I don't use AI and I don't use Photoshop, but my goal was to I take photographs and then I alter them, have them printed on canvas. My goal is to visually represent their supernatural and amazing abilities and magical auras. So that's the goal of my art. Posted that on Facebook, and I had written for The Wild Hunt, a pagan news website.
Yes.
I was covering arts and entertainment that pagan and Wiccans and witches and heathens were creating. So that was what I was doing in my real world job at a daily newspaper for the general populace. Anyway, my editor, Heather Green, she got a job at Llewellyn. She saw my crow art and she said, Rick, why don't you do a book on crows? So that's how the seed was planted. Never thought about it. And, so then I started deep diving, of course. I mean, by then I was already researching crows and ravens. And, as we talked about earlier, you don't have to be pagan. If you're watching these birds, you will see that they have these uncanny abilities and behaviors that set them apart from other birds and most animals. So that intrigued me. And when I went into the research for the book, like you mentioned Gilgamesh, I wanted to find the first mention of a crow in literature, and it goes back to our world's oldest epic. There is a crow in Gilgamesh, doesn't figure prominently. In some of the old Hebrew writings, raven, Noah has a dust up with a raven. When I came across that in some ancient rabbinical texts, it's not in the Old Testament, crows are in the Old Testament. But when I came across these ancient Jewish writings, where Raven, who's talking and accuses Noah of wanting to get rid of the raven so that Noah can get with his wife, Raven's wife. I had to read that passage like 10 times. Am I reading this correctly? But it was interesting with that because, and those texts were written, go back to like 200 to 300 Common Era or 300 AD, the text for that. But the attitude of the raven sounds remarkably like the attitude of Raven the trickster, who's a trickster figure in the North American Pacific Coast tribes. The Raven mythology there is a trickster. He's selfish, he's sassy, he's looking out for himself, and he's a trickster, and he ends up inadvertently doing things beneficial for humankind when he's really just trying to satisfy his own lust, whether it's food, power, or even sexual lust. Yeah. So across those centuries, the ancient Hebrews and the Native Americans of the Pacific Northwest of, the last several centuries, their mythologies amazingly dovetail when it comes to perceiving the character of crows and ravens. And it's kind of the same with the ancient Norse Viking mythology and the ancient Irish mythologies. So there's a remarkable consistency there that speaks to how these creatures have affected humankind. And it's not just the mythology. The ancient Romans, and I have this in the book, there's a famous account of the Roman army was going into battle with an army from Gaul, and the champion of Gaul challenged one of the Roman generals to one-on-one combat, and a crow magically appears and is fighting the Gaul, and anyway, the Roman wins, and this is documented by this ancient Roman historian. Now, of course, we know history is written by the victors and all that thing, but to me, it's still evidence like this. And anyway, the general was given the name Corvus, was added to his name in commemoration of this. He then led his entire army to a victory over the Gauls. But it seems like there is more than a seed of reality in this encounter, that there was a crow that helped the Roman army that day, so much so that this general became known as Marcus Valerius Corvus.
Yes.
So it's not just mythology and spirituality, but there's science. John Marsliff, probably the world's leading biologist who studied crows. His books are wonderful. I refer to them in my book. So science has documented, since I wrote the book, when I give talks or on podcasts, I'll say, oh, crows remember human faces, and people, it's like, oh, most people know that if you harm a crow, it's going to shun you. If you're good to a crow, they will remember that, and they will pass it on to other members of their tribe. And not only that, it doesn't have to be the crow that witnessed the event. They will pass it on to other crows. So if you've been aggressive towards crows, you will get a reputation, and they are able to pass it on to their offspring. So it's just, that's why in my book, it has science, it has lore, it has history, it has mythology, and then being a pagan, it has rituals and meditations and exercises where some are very practical, some are quote unquote magical, where I hope it's a way to build communion with these animals. And when that happens, then you're going to see that nature and this planet we live on is far more magical than any of us may have realized. So
I think it shows, Rick, just how intelligent these creatures have been viewed throughout history, because as you say there, they seem to have permeated most Western cultures that we're aware of, regardless of the time, even into the Middle East with the legends of Gilgamesh.
Yes.
I suppose when you started to delve into this, regardless of your own personal knowledge and your own experiences, were you surprised to see how prevalent crows and ravens has been across the world and how different cultures have viewed them? Because I know, as you mentioned earlier, in regards to the Norse legends, Odin was renowned for having two that would serve him, that would sit on his shoulders, and people would consider them to be his spies. But obviously, I think they're one of those things that, despite the fact that we've had a big resurgence in Norse mythology thanks to the Marvel films recently and concentrating on Thor and Odin and Loki in the films, but I think they're those kind of characters that people just kind of blink and you'll miss them, or you won't understand the relevance or the fact that it is actually a concreted pillar of Norse mythology. Their roles in serving Woden and the work that he does in regards to protecting Valhalla and beyond.
Oh, absolutely. I was astonished by the ubiquity of crows and ravens in mythologies around the world. And I wanted to see if I could discover the earliest human awareness of crows or ravens. And turns out, which I mentioned in my book prominently, the Lascaux cave paintings, which were, scientists date them about 18,000 years ago. But there's this wonderful cave painting that looks to be of a crow-headed shaman. A drawing of it is reproduced in my book, and it doesn't, it's to me, it's, and many researchers, it is a crow. It's just so much logical that it is a crow or raven, who are part of the same family known as corvids. But it's evidence that, here 18,000 years ago, these birds were creating these impressions upon us humans. So that's a long time. And you mentioned the Norse mythologies with, it's actually two ravens, Hugin and Munin, whose names translate as thought and memory. And those mythologies date back to, I think, the Viking Age around 800 AD or so to 1100 AD. And that tells me, that the ancient Norse were very good naturalists. So they watched these animals and they realized they seem to have thought, because crows seem to act very deliberately. And as we talked about, they were aware long before biologist John Marsliff did his definitive experiments demonstrating that crows will remember human faces. He used a caveman mask and a Dick Cheney mask, if you remember, our former vice president. Anyway, that's in the book. But they realized, wow, these birds have memory. So that means that the ancient Norse were very perspicacious naturalists. They were aware of their surroundings, which they had to be because just for the fight of survival. But they also, I don't even know if I would call it a leap, because they also began to see this as being a part of the divine nature, the divine workings of the universe, and it became a part of their mythology. And even today, crows are magical creatures to me. And I think if anybody watches them for a while, you don't have to be pagan or Wiccan, but if you watch them, they're going to make you aware that there's this magical, mystical, even supernatural element in the natural world that seems to go beyond, I was going to say David Attenborough, but he's such a good nature guy. He's not the best example, but just the casual things you see on TV, it's far more mysterious and wonderful. And the great thing about crows and ravens, which they're right here in our backyard. They're everywhere. They're on every continent except Antarctica. So like you said earlier, most of the human population is probably going to have encounters with crows or ravens. I see as many crows when I go to my local Target shopping center as I do in my backyard, which backs up the woods. Maybe not quite as many, but they're everywhere. They're everywhere. And a reminder that, wow, this world is magical in so many ways.
I think that they're one of those creatures as well, Rick, that, as you were saying there about the scientific discoveries that we've learnt over the years about, do you think that when we talk about crows and ravens and other members of the Corvid family, they're one of those creatures that has shown us their intelligence over the years? I mean, I remember as a child seeing crows putting pebbles into vessels to get to water like 40 years ago, Rick. So they seem to, I think the old sort of, we would call it here, kitchen table magic, and that kind of sort of traditional wise woman or wise man that lived in a particular area, they would probably be more aware of the talents of such creatures. And it seems that it's only in the modern era that modern civilization, shall we say, the peoples in cities and towns, have rediscovered their connection with these creatures because they've started to notice it more. And I know lots of people that have built these relationships up where they're feeding the crows and they've built this relationship too, and it's almost like they say hello to them every morning, and these kind of conversations that they'll have, as most of us have with any animals. I know I talk to all my animals that wander about.
Yeah.
And yet they end up receiving gifts from them.
It's just amazing. As you know, YouTube, the internet is just filled with those kind of accounts. And I'm so jealous of those because when I've done book signings and given workshops on crow and raven behavior and magical abilities, people will share those encounters, and I'm just amazed. And but yeah, I think you're correct that we seem to be because I'm amazed at the number of people that I come in contact with who know crow lore, who know crow behaviors. Now, some people are kind of creeped out by crows and ravens because they have this association with death that seems to go back to the ancient battlefields of Europe and maybe around the world, because the crows and ravens learned to follow armies into battle because they knew that there would be corpses. And yes, crows and ravens will feed on human corpses. And there seems to be this latent memory that has survived over the centuries, that this consciousness that crows and ravens have this certain signification of death. Obviously, I think that's unfair to leave it at that.
Yes.
But there is this awareness and out there. And with our modern technology, like so many other things, it's all there on the internet. And And as a journalist, we used to have a saying in the newsroom: if your mother says she loves you, check it out. Meaning, don't take anything for granted. Don't assume.
Yeah.
So anytime I see something on the internet, whether it's crows or ravens or whatever, my journalist instinct says, well, verify this. But from what I've seen of these crow and raven videos, they're very legit, and science has proven they have a sense of play. They will mess with other animals. There's videos of crows pulling the tails of dogs and that kind of thing. So it's and you contrast that to Edgar Allan Poe's encounter with the raven, Nevermore, which is kind of creepy and all that. But they have this wonderful sense of play. They're intelligent. They form communities, tribes, like you said. They use tools. They're able to figure out problems. So there's, and it's wonderful to me. Until just now, I don't really consider myself a crow ambassador, but
yes,
maybe I am.
Yes.
Just because, I can't imagine my life without them. And I'm spoiled because here in my, home in Palm Coast, Florida, they come by every day. And like I said, I think I said earlier, it seems like every spring, they disappear for 2 or 3 weeks, and then new crows will arrive. And I think it may have something to do with their mating habits and raising their young. But it does seem to be new, different crows who will suddenly appear in mid or late March. And how do you tell the difference? Well, their behaviors are different. Different crows will behave in different ways. Some will land on this tree, some will land on that tree, some have a faster walk. One spring there were 3 crows that would get the crackers I threw out for them. They'd disappear over my house. It's like, what are they doing? Finally, I went outside one time, and the 3 of them were on the roof of my house eating the crackers. So that distinguished them. And the crows that are coming by now, there's 6 of them. And they don't do that. They come by in a pack of 6. I guess I should say a murder of 6. So they're I hesitate to call them my pets because that seems kind of making a claim of ownership or whatever. They're watching me as much as I watch them. I am convinced of that. Yeah. So.
Well, I was going to suggest, Rick, do you live with them or do they live with you? This is the thing, isn't it? Because have they trained you to feed them, or are they responding to your food?
That's what I tell people, and I believe that because when I first started putting crackers out, and it's like, duh, of course, if you want to attract any animal, domesticated or wildlife, if you give it food, of course. But with crows, it's kind of different. Because, it's been proven they recognize human faces. But just got the common sense idea. I'm going to throw some crackers or tortilla chips in my backyard. And they would come and eat them sooner or later. And then very shortly, they would announce their arrival with the, archetypal caw, caw. And then I told myself, anytime I hear them, I'm going to take them food, throw some crackers. So yeah, I tell my girlfriend, Michelle, and everybody, the crows say jump. I say how high. And my house backs up the woods, and there's flat woods, that go about 3 miles to another part of the neighborhood. Although I'm in a suburb, I'm in a cul-de-sac. I hear a rooster across the flat woods about 2 or 3 miles away. But most mornings it's the crows, a crow that will wake me up. And it's either a burst of 3 caws or sometimes a pattern of 5. And I'm convinced that they're saying, Rick, wake up. We want some food or that they are alerting their other crows nearby, that, we're about to summon this guy that brings us movie theater butter flavored popcorn. So, and when my girlfriend comes over, almost every time she comes over, she lives, in Daytona Beach, which is about 10 miles down, the coast here.
Yeah.
She says, most days when I come, the crows come to greet me because they'll be up in the trees and cawing at her. So yeah, I am convinced that, they have trained me. There is a symbiotic relationship happening. Yeah. So
I think some people would be very surprised as well that there are niches inside paganism, that people will specialize in crow raven magic. Rick, is that something that you'd stumbled across in your previous experience and your learning in regards to paganism as you've grown, or were you even surprised to rediscover it as part of this book?
Well, when I emerged on my pagan path in the early 90s, and the way that happened is, in the late 80s, I was living in Dothan, Alabama, where I went to high school. And in the library, I just kind of serendipitously came across a book on ancient Irish and Celtic mythology and spirituality. And I came across, a depiction of Cernunnos, the antlered god of the ancient Celts, on the famous Gundestrup cauldron, which is actually in a museum in Denmark. So that planted the seed. And so, and whenever I would walk in nature, I would feel something. And I jokingly kid to myself that if somebody says, Rick, your spiritual path is based on the fact that you walked in the woods and you had a funny feeling, and I will say, yes, that's exactly the seed of it. But from the beginning, though, there was, a part of paganism is this seeing divinity in nature, which of course includes, all the creatures, of nature. But the crows did not really emerge. I grew up in northern New Mexico in Los Alamos, literally 3 miles from the lab where Oppenheimer and his cohorts developed the atomic bomb.
Yeah.
So, encountered wildlife out there in northern New Mexico. And so I knew that paganism, most pagans have this relationship with the natural world. The crow thing just seemed, like I said, when I came across that statue of Cuchulainn, that spurred something in me. And then the fact that they were showing up in my backyard, that was another leap. And then the fact that, if I feed them a little bit, there seems to be more than just instinct that they're returning. I mean, I throw crackers out, the cardinals and the Carolina wrens will come and snatch them up and fly away. And it's just like, they're just operating on instinct.
Yeah.
And the same with the squirrels. So there, immediately there was this intelligence at play. I could see. And so that became my thing. And given my research into the mythologies of the world, evidently these creatures have been connecting in spiritual ways for literally centuries or millennia, going back to that Lascaux cave painting.
Yeah.
So it's, I didn't invent this or rediscovered it. It's always been there. And I guess, to get back to part of the heart of your question is there's so many distractions in this modern world, both good and, and not so good, that it's easy to get taken. And I write about this in the book. Colin Wilson, who's one of my favorite writers on, metaphysical matters and the occult, his book, The Occult, is must reading. But he talks about, how we humans allow the robot mind to take over our consciousness. We let the robot serves its purpose. I don't want to be thinking about the spiritual quality of water every time I'm thirsty and I want to get a drink. It has its purpose.
Yes.
It helps us get through those mundane, aspects of life. But at the same time, the robot, can take over, or what the Buddhists call the chattering monkey mind.
Yes.
And for me, forging a communion with crows and ravens is a way to quiet that monkey mind and to turn away from the robot and engage. I think a lot of occult and supernatural phenomenon are it's a matter of us humans paying attention. I think these energies, we learn in the 5th grade or wherever that matter is made up of revolving atoms. This table I'm tapping on, 5th grade science says it appears solid, but we now know that there's a nucleus of protons and neutrons, and the electrons are orbiting around, and the Earth goes around our sun. Our galaxy is moving. The cosmos is expansion, constant energy, constant motion. And so I think a lot of, for me in my pagan path is, it's not so woo-woo really to try and discover the source of these energies and how we can find, not so much manipulate them, but just be aware of them. I mean, I'm 65 years old, so for 40 years or so, I would see a crow and I was like, oh, that's a beautiful bird. Then I'd go on and, go get my groceries.
Yeah.
So it's only in the past 20 years, 25 years that I've become aware of their magical presence. So now I'm kind of ambling. I can't remember if I've addressed your question or not. But I think that's and it's not something just, you don't have to be on a pagan or Wiccan path or any spiritual path to have this awareness. I think if we focus and Colin Wilson talks about that a lot, if we are able to have this certain, and it's not just him, if we're able to focus on things, instead of letting the monkey mind intrude, we can see things that have always been there, but we just weren't aware of them.
Yes.
So that's, just a wonderful, process to comprehend and go through and to be surprised by life again.
Yeah, I've always found it quite interesting. One of the things about strange phenomena and myth and legend and lore is that occasionally there will be things that occur, Rick, that make me chuckle. And I know you mentioned Alaska's paintings and the cave art that we discovered in 1940 around that. One of the things that's always struck me about that story and makes me smile is the fact that it was accidentally discovered by a dog called Robot, which I find is incredible.
I did not know that.
That was the name of the guy who discovered it. It was his dog that was called Robot that burrowed into the cave, and that's how he found it. Which just makes me chuckle after what you've just been saying there about the robot mind.
Oh, wow. I will have to thank you for the heads up and knowledge there. I will have to, I have read some of the history of the discovery of the cave, but it's, I see I need to do a deeper dive, but that's the other thing. And crows and ravens are really, good, a good way to encounter the whimsy of nature, of Gaia. Ravens from what I've read, and there are no ravens in Florida. Audubon tells me that there's just crows. Ravens are in the northeast of the U.S. and in the west, Midwest, Southwest. But ravens are acrobatic flyers. They'll fly upside down. They'll do barrel rolls. I've read that crows will do that, but I haven't witnessed that myself. Crows have, as I mentioned, they will play with other animals. They will mess with other animals. The crow books that are out there, they're full of accounts of them. We're used to seeing dogs play. Of course, dogs are domesticated and live with us humans, but crows just out in nature, they've been observed doing stuff that has no, and I know they're not the only animals, but that has nothing to do with getting food or survival. It just seems like they're doing things just for the sheer joy of it.
Absolutely.
And so they're this reminder of, for so long for our ancestors, existence was, a daily struggle, or if not a struggle, certainly the priority had to be securing food and shelter. These days, I cry if it's a holiday and I'm hungry and I go to my local store and they're closed. It's like, oh, I wanted my bag of Doritos. Damn, life is so hard,
First world problems, like, Rick.
Yeah, exactly. But there's just so many mysteries in this world that I think, and just the title of your podcast, I just love it. I'm one of those. I have this my rational pragmatic brain. Will say, Rick, there's an explanation for everything, and my mystical intuitive brain, she'll shake her head and say, Rick, there's more in this, quoting the old Shakespeare Horatio line.
Yes.
So Misty Into Brain has been winning more of those conversations lately. So it does surprise me that a dog named Robot discovered Lascaux. But in another sense, it doesn't. That seems, and that's why I love the magazine 40 and Times that you mentioned. They're doing, their staff and many writers are documenting some of these, what seem to be anomalies, but they may just be much more common, a part of our existence than our rat prag brain wants to confess to.
Yeah. I think it is surprising sometimes when we see animals that we don't associate with play, Rick, as you refer to there. I think one of the best examples when we're talking about corvids is the wonderful footage that came out a few years ago where someone had filmed, I think it was a crow that had got some kind of like a Tupperware lid or something, and it was snowboarding down a roof on it.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
I mean,
I've seen...
that just shows you just spontaneous joy in animals. And like you said earlier, there's lots of creatures that involve themselves in play that, as you say, don't seem to have any real relevance to their survival as a creature. But it shows us that we create these rules and regulations about what we consider the intelligence of an animal. And unless we really sort of sit back and take notice, we miss these little things. And as we were saying about crows and their intelligence and ravens and things, it just shows you that for a lot of people, you take them for granted. And until you kind of take a step back out of the real world and just admire and appreciate what's going on around you, you miss these wonderful things. But as we've become more connected and people have video cameras in their pockets all the time, we're now glimpsing these strange and wonderful and amusing behaviours, because I find it hard to believe that anybody could watch that footage and not have a smile on their face afterwards.
Oh, exactly. And I've mentioned John Marsliff, the foremost crow wildlife biologist, crow expert, from what I can tell in the world. And he writes in one of his books about, I think he was in maybe Colorado or Utah, somewhere in the U.S., western U.S., and he and others were in this mountainous park area, the Rocky Mountains, and they were watching these ravens who were picking up pieces of tree bark and windsurfing with them. They would pick them up and then they would dive off the edge of this cliff high up, and then they were just kind of like doing this, and they were repeating it. There was this whole group of ravens who were doing this, turn by turn. and it, like you said, it just made me smile. And it's like, wow. And so the fact that is, from what we know, is not just an anomaly, it's a part of their being, is a reminder, I think, to us humankind, that, again, the world's more mysterious than we know. But certainly there's lessons to be learned. In fact, in my book, it was my editor's suggestion. She said, well, we want you to include some lessons of things you've learned from crows and well, in my case, crows. And I thought, yeah, that's a wonderful idea, because they are teaching me as much, I'm learning from their ways of being in the world. And again, it's not just crows or ravens. I'm sure horse lovers and certainly dog and cat lovers can tell you, and whether it's Jane Goodall among the gorillas in Africa, and David Attenborough, all his wonderful nature documentation. It's just like, wow, we really, that's a part, not to trumpet my pagan tribe, but that's a significant part of our spiritual path, is recognizing the sacredness of Gaia, who is our personification of nature, the great earth goddess Gaia. And for some of us pagans, she is a literal entity. And for some of us, she's kind of a divine metaphor for these mysteries that we don't quite understand. I'm still an agnostic on whether is Gaia an actual entity, or is she a metaphorical way of representing this mysterious divine feminine force that's at operation in the universe. But anyway, there's so many ways that we can become aware of these mysteries of nature that really aren't mysteries if we just take the time to stop and look. This is a weird ass tangent, but years ago when I was working at daily newspapers, I would write about, my editors would give me leeway. I was a feature writer as well as arts and entertainment. So I loved doing stories on Fortean stuff and on high weirdness. Anyway, I interviewed a Bigfoot researcher who lived in Florida and would investigate. Here in Florida, we call them the skunk ape.
Yes, Dave Shealy especially.
Yes, and he told me he went down to South Florida because there were reports of a skunk ape down there. And he's telling me, he's like, yeah, he was near, I don't know if it was one of the swamps down there. He said it got very quiet, which, the birds and everything in the forest got quiet, which he knew was a sign that maybe something strange is going on. And he just got this overwhelming feeling that something was about to happen. And you know what happened? And he told me this on the record. He turned around and ran because he lost his nerve. And I love that story. I love that he told it to me, that it's in my story, that I wrote for the newspaper. But it kind of shows that, I don't know, tension, between us humans and the natural world. We're intrigued by it. And I say natural, and maybe I should say natural / supernatural world. We're intrigued by these things, and yet, we find them hard to grasp. We want to know. My girlfriend is a psychic intuitive witch. Whenever we go, she wrote a book called Florida's Haunted Hospitality. And she went around and stayed at the most haunted inns and B&Bs in the state of Florida and wrote about it. So anytime we go anywhere, she says, Rick, I want to stay in whatever is the most haunted inn in that area. And I'm always kind of like, whoa. But that's her thing. And she's had these amazing experiences that she's documented. But it seems like we kind of we humans, we want to know. And yet there's a certain amount, and I'm generalizing, there's a certain amount of dread or fear or something that just kind of holds us back.
Yeah.
And I don't have any explanation for that, but there are plenty of people who do want to know and who are out there investigating these things and bringing them into consciousness, which I'm grateful for, because that's what intrigues me about life. I'm reminded of Nigel Tufnell, fictional, semi-fictional guitarist of the metal band Spinal Tap in the movie. He says, people accuse us of writing songs about the devil and evil, but I think the people who build those little ships inside bottles, those little model ships, I think they're a lot more evil. And I just love that, because it's like, okay, it does get down to one's perspective on these things.
Yeah.
And I only, not to get on my soapbox, but it's a hopefully people have open minds.
Yeah.
Another one of my favorite writers, Robert Anton Wilson, who wrote a lot of stuff about spooky stuff, metaphysics, supernatural. But one of his saying was that convictions make us convicts. If we're convinced about something, he said, then we stop thinking about it.
Yes.
And so that was his way of saying, keep an open mind.
Mm.
The crows I don't know if you can hear them.
Yes, I've been hearing them for the last 5 minutes. They've been joining us.
Yes, they have. They're yeah. Hello. Oh, welcome back. You still got some popcorn out there, so come and get it. Yeah, they're here. Okay, it looks like the whole crew's going to be arriving here. So
I would have been disappointed if they didn't join us, Rick.
Well, to be honest, me too. Do
you think as well? I think the last bit before I let you leave and check on your friends. Do you think that as we've learnt more about the world about us, this negative connotation that's been associated with ravens and crows, because there is a lot of negativity, and as you said earlier on in the conversation, people always viewed them as having some kind of evil malevolence or something because of their appetite, really, that they'll eat anything, and then so they've become one of those cliches you can see in certain horror films over the years, or a witch is familiar or something, whereas essentially what we now realise is that they're just extremely intelligent and bright animals that have a bit more about them than simply the old adage of somebody being stupid being bird-brained, whereas crows and ravens show us that term is just nonsensical.
Well, you're exactly right. And when I was in the process of writing my book and reading every significant crow book I could get my hands on, at first I was amazed. Every writer that's written about crows that I've read has experienced this, and I certainly did. When people find out you're writing about crows, you're going to get a sizable response of it's like, ooh, crows. I don't like crows. And one of my friends told me, she said, oh, I don't like crows. I saw a crow take down and eat a baby dove. And okay, well, to me, it's that Disney circle of life thing. There are predators that will prey on crows and ravens too. But yeah, people, I was surprised at the number of people who said that crows make them uneasy, crows and ravens. And, I think it's, Edgar Allan Poe. It's the fact that they will eat human corpses, although they may not know that specifically. And like you said, pop culture, in Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, there's that grisly scene where a crow is pecking out the eyes of a dead man in a bed. So we like to scare ourselves, and I think maybe with crows and ravens, a part of it may be that if I see a movie about a lion devouring somebody in the jungle, I'm not in the jungle. I'm in coastal Florida. But crows and ravens, most people are going to see them every day. Maybe not every day, but their presence is just about everywhere. So we humans can't ignore them. And a lot of people, they're considered songbirds in the scientific classification. Yes. They're in part of the order that's called, and people say, what? That's, they want the tweeting birds. But that caw, just, it drives me crazy. But crows are right there in our face, so to speak. So we humans, we can ignore them, but they're going to be lurking there. And so that may play into, and some of this dread or uneasiness that people have because they're going to be in their backyard. If you live in an urban area, crows are very at home in the concrete jungle. Yeah. So maybe that's a part of that feeds into this angst that people may have. It seems to, in my experience, it seems it's not quite 50-50, but there's people when they find out, oh, you wrote the Crow book, there's, I don't know, it's more than 50%. People's like, oh, I love them. I love crows and ravens. I love corvids. But there's a sizable minority who just kind of shudder. It's like, So anyway, I'm not going to try and talk them out of their crow dread, but maybe they'll keep an open mind and find that they're very worthy companions to us humans here in this world. So.
I suppose as well, because one of the great aspects of the book, Rick, is that you've got personal experiences littered throughout it from people.
Yes.
Were you surprised at the amount of people who were still considering crows and ravens as a portent, as though their arrival suggests something is coming, even though at that time it's probably not obvious what's about to happen, but when they look back at it, they have an encounter with such one of the Corvids, and they realise that there is a real symbolism to that encounter, that it struck them as strange at the time.
Yeah, I've had those myself, and to the heart of your question, it immediately makes me think, am I, because of my pagan spiritual path, which is wrapped up in engaging nature and finding and seeking communion with various aspects of nature, maybe I'm just more aware of that because of my spiritual path. But then at the same time, I think you're right. You don't have to be pagan to have those experiences. And in fact, some of the people that I interview, in my book are not on a pagan path. And one experience that is not in my book, I had to move during the writing of my book in 2019. I literally moved 3 miles down the road. But right before I moved, I don't know, 2 or 3 months before I had to move, I looked in my backyard and there was a crow hanging upside down on a tree branch. I was like, whoa. I scrambled to get my camera, and because I wanted, but by the time I got my camera, it was gone. And for a while I thought maybe I didn't see it. Then I read some literature, and other crow watchers have seen that. And immediately I thought of the Hanged Man card in the tarot decks, in the classic tarot decks. I thought, and it was a strange encounter, weird encounter. Then I had to move, but it wasn't until a couple of years that I settled into my new place that it's like, oh, the Hanged Man, the meaning, it can be a number of meanings in the tarot decks, but it's being suspended between action and inaction, a stasis. It can be emblematic of challenges. And it took me 2 or 3 years to connect that sighting of the upside down crow with my circumstances of having to move. And then I just kind of got, whoa, So that was a case kind of like you talked, where it wasn't immediately apparent that, now I see it clearly as a sign. In my cosmology of the way I see the world, it was a sign. And other people have similar experiences. And so are they supernatural agents? I think that's up for each of us to decide. But the evidence goes all the way back to that cave in France 18,000 years ago with that crow-headed shaman. We don't know what that crow-headed shaman signifies, except that there was some kind of bird that stood out among our human ancestors, and it was very likely a crow or raven. So we have been sharing not just the planet, but a certain consciousness for a millennium with these creatures. And they're my friends. I feel blessed that they're a part of my life.
Yeah. Well, your love for them shines through the book in every aspect of it, Rick. And so it shows us that there are many things to really appreciate out there. And like I say, it seems to be something that is becoming a real sort of growing movement, that even here in the UK, there are friends of mine who I know who will share the gifts that they've been left, or the relationships, or the fact that the crows will come back with their chicks the following year and introduce them, as it were, as though they're saying, oh, this is our human friend.
Yes, exactly. And I try not to get jealous about those encounters, because I'm always, but I just feel blessed that they come by my home every day. That's a blessing. So yeah, it's, I know there would be people saying, they're plotting to take over the world. But no, I don't think that's it. I think they're just they're true to their nature, and they hold lessons for us humans on so many levels. So
I suppose as well, going forward, Rick, before I let you leave, has this given you a wider appreciation or a thirst to dive into some other supernatural elements, or some of the histories of other creatures that we take for granted around us, by diving into the history and legends and myths and lore of these beautiful and intelligent creatures?
Absolutely. In my home here in Florida, every now and then it's a small breed of scorpion. And if I find one in my home, if it's alive, I'm going to scoop it up with a piece of paper and put it out in the yard. If it's dead, I put it on my pagan altar. But yeah, I want to know more about scorpions, and living next to wood, black racer snakes come through my yard. A bobcat came by a year or so and sat right in my backyard. So yeah, there's so many, the natural world, it absolutely has increased my curiosity about spiders. If I find spiders in my home, I let them live. They're usually in nooks or crannies. And it occurred to me a couple of years ago, it's like, well, my girlfriend stays here sometimes, but I live alone. But then I realized I don't live alone. I live with scorpions, spiders, microscopic bugs. Sometimes lizards get in the house. So there's this whole ecosystem going on inside my walls. But to answer your question, yes, it has very much made me aware of. I used to be fearful of snakes. I still am cautious, but I respect them. And growing up in Los Alamos in New Mexico, we would literally encounter western diamondback rattlesnakes out in the road. Because we lived, there was woods and canyons around the mobile home park where my family lived. But even now, when I see the eastern yellow rat snakes in my yard, they're a beautiful snake. So we share this planet. I know it sounds hippy dippy, la la la, oh, peace and love towards all creatures. But I think there's truth in that, and there's goodness in that, to realize that we humans, in my view, we don't hold dominion over the other creatures. We share this planet with them. Oh, and I have a big, bulky hand drum that's too heavy to carry the drum circles, which I love doing the drum circle thing. So anyway, I just put it out in my driveway, and wild bees have made their hive in it. That just thrills me. Bees are sacred creatures to so many people. So that's been another blessing this spring, that the bees have created a hive. And of course, I'm going to let them, they're not in my house. But that's another blessing. So
absolutely.
Yes, I jokingly tell people sometimes that the animal kingdom is the best kingdom. So maybe it's not a joke. I'm glad the crows allow me to be in their world.
Oh, Well, I'm glad they've let you in, and I'm glad that this has allowed you to write such a fascinating and deeply interesting book. Where can everybody get hold of a copy of it, Rick, and follow your work online and also discover your marvelous artwork?
Yes, well, my book is on, my publisher is Llewellyn, so I have my own author page on Llewellyn. It is available on Amazon. I got word a couple of months ago from my publicist that it's going to be translated into French. I don't know when that's going to happen, but
Wow.
Anyway, that's a blessing. Yeah. I have it's also available in an audio book format. I have my website, rickdeyampert.com, all one word. My crow art is MISTER, MrCrowArt.com. That's where you'll see samples of my images, which are all photographed. I tell people I take photographs, I put the digital woo-woo on them, and I have them printed on canvas for sale. But my rule is I never alter the shape of the crows. There's a program where you can use the mouse as a paintbrush, but I never alter the shape or image of the crows itself. If you see a crow with its wings, whatever kind of strange way, or walking on a limb or whatever, that's how my camera captured them. So for me, it's very important that I maintain some documentary aspect in my crow art. And finally, my music side, my girlfriend Michelle and I play sitar, Native American flutes, drums. My girlfriend Michelle plays tongue drums, crystal bowls, bass. So we're wanderingspiral.com, WANDERING spiral.com. So yeah, that's my internet presence there. Well, I was just going to say I'm also on Paul's podcast, so that's a good thing. Thank you for having me.
My absolute pleasure, Rick. I'll put links to everything in the show notes so everybody can track you down and get a hold of some of your work. And I just want to say thank you so much for a deeply enjoyable and thought-provoking conversation about corvids and their magical history. And I really look forward to the next project you do, and I hope it's not too long till we get another book from you, sir.
I hope so too. Thank you so much, Paul.
Pleasure.
Take care. Goodbye.